Picture this. It's December 1872, and a ship is drifting alone in the middle of the Atlantic. No captain, no crew, no passengers, and somehow, the ship is still perfectly capable of sailing. This was the Mary Celeste. When another ship finally came across her, there was no obvious sign of a disaster. The food was still there. The cargo was still there. The crew's belongings were still on board. Even the captain's cabin was strangely intact. But there was one problem. Everyone was gone. And this wasn't some ancient legend discovered hundreds of years later. This actually happened. And here's where the story gets really weird. Because whoever abandoned the Mary Celeste didn't leave in a desperate rush. They didn't take everything they could carry. They didn't destroy the ship. They simply disappeared into the Atlantic. And the strangest part? The people who found the ship had no idea why. So, what the hell happened aboard the Mary Celeste? Was it an explosion? A mutiny? Pirates? Or did the captain make a decision that seemed completely reasonable at the time, but ultimately cost everyone their lives? To understand that, we need to go back to the beginning, because the Mary Celeste didn't start her voyage as a ghost ship. She left New York with a captain, his family, and a crew, expecting nothing more than an ordinary trip across the Atlantic. And that's where things get interesting. The captain of the Mary Celeste was Benjamin Briggs, and he wasn't some reckless sailor looking for trouble. He was an experienced captain with a solid reputation. But this voyage was different because Briggs wasn't traveling alone. His wife, Sarah, and their young daughter, Sophia, were coming with him. The plan was simple. Take the Mary Celeste from New York across the Atlantic, deliver its cargo of industrial alcohol in Italy, and come home. Nothing about the trip was supposed to become history. On November 7th, 1872, the Mary Celeste left New York Harbor, and at first, everything went exactly as planned. The ship carried more than 1,700 barrels of alcohol. The crew knew their job. The weather was manageable, and Briggs had no reason to believe that anything extraordinary was about to happen. But somewhere across the Atlantic, the weather began to change. The sea became rougher, the wind became stronger, and the Mary Celeste sailed toward the Azores. Then came the storms, and this is where we need to pay attention, because the last known entries in the ship's log suggest that Briggs was still in control. The Mary Celeste wasn't sinking. There was no report of a mutiny, no attack, no sign that the crew had suddenly turned against their captain. Everything seemed normal until the final entry. After that moment, the Mary Celeste story becomes a giant question mark, because when the next ship found her days later, the captain, his family, and every member of the crew had vanished. And somehow, the ship was still sailing. Now here's where things start getting creepy. The last entries in the Mary Celeste log were written near the Azores. And after that, nothing. No final message. No warning. No explanation. Just silence. When investigators later examined the ship, they found something even stranger. There was water inside the cargo hold. Not enough to sink the ship, but enough to make any captain nervous. And remember what was inside that hold. More than 1,700 barrels of industrial alcohol. So imagine you're Captain Briggs. You feel the ship moving beneath your feet. You know the cargo you're carrying can be dangerous. You check the hold and discover water where it shouldn't be. Maybe the ship is taking on more water than expected. Maybe you hear something coming from below deck. Maybe you think the alcohol cargo could be leaking fumes. And now you have a choice. Stay aboard and hope everything is fine, or get everyone into the lifeboat until you understand what's happening. Here's the thing. Briggs was an experienced captain. If he ordered everyone into the lifeboat, he probably believed there was a serious reason for it. And the evidence suggests the evacuation wasn't chaotic. The crew took important navigation equipment. They prepared the lifeboat, and they connected it to the Mary Celeste with a long rope. That detail is huge, because it suggests they weren't planning to abandon the ship forever. They were planning to come back. The lifeboat was supposed to be their safe place, just for a little while. But then, the Atlantic decided otherwise. 9 days later, another ship spotted the Mary Celeste. It was the Dei Grazia, commanded by Captain David Morehouse. At first, they thought the Mary Celeste was simply struggling in the rough Atlantic. But as they got closer, something didn't feel right. The ship was moving. Its sails were still up, but there was nobody on deck. No captain, no sailors, nobody. Morehouse has sent men over to investigate, and what they found made the situation even stranger. The Mary Celeste wasn't wrecked. The hull was still intact. The cargo was still there. Food and water remained aboard. Personal belongings were still in the cabins. It looked less like a ship that had been abandoned, and more like a ship that had been interrupted, as if everyone had simply stood up and walked away. But then they found the missing lifeboat, and that changed everything. The boat wasn't on board. The navigation equipment was missing too. So the crew hadn't simply vanished. They had left the Mary Celeste. The question was, why? And this is where the theories began. Some people suspected Captain Morehouse and his crew. Maybe they had attacked the Mary Celeste. Maybe the entire thing was a murder. Others suggested pirates. Some even claimed the crew had mutinied. And newspapers had a field day. Because a completely empty ship drifting across the Atlantic, that's not just a mystery. That's a perfect headline. But there was a problem with all those theories. There was almost no evidence of violence. No bodies. No major damage. No stolen cargo. Nothing that explained why an experienced captain would voluntarily leave a perfectly seaworthy ship. And then investigators discovered something inside the cargo hold that may have changed the entire story. And this is where the Mary Celeste story gets really interesting. Inside the cargo hold were more than 1,700 barrels of industrial alcohol. And when investigators inspected them, they discovered something strange. 9 barrels were empty. Now, that might sound like a boring detail, but alcohol doesn't need a match to become dangerous. It evaporates, and inside a sealed cargo hold, those vapors could build up. So imagine what that could mean. If enough alcohol vapor accumulated, a sudden ignition could create a powerful pressure wave. Not necessarily a giant Hollywood explosion, just a violent blast of air. Enough to terrify everyone aboard. Enough to make the crew believe another explosion could happen at any moment. And suddenly, the lifeboat makes a lot more sense. Briggs may not have believed the Mary Celeste was sinking. He may have believed it was about to explode. And if you have your wife and your young daughter aboard, waiting around to find out whether you're right isn't exactly a great parenting strategy. So Briggs orders everyone into the lifeboat. The plan is simple. Get away from the ship. Stay connected by rope. Wait until the danger passes. Then come back aboard. Except, there was one tiny problem. The Atlantic Ocean. And that problem was about to turn a temporary evacuation into one of the greatest maritime mysteries in history. So far, the theory actually makes sense. Briggs sees a possible danger. He gets his family and crew into the lifeboat, and he keeps the Mary Celeste connected with a long rope. That way they can stay close without staying aboard the ship. The plan should have been simple. Wait for the danger to pass, then climb back aboard. Except the weather wasn't finished with them. The wind suddenly became stronger. The Mary Celeste's sails caught the wind, and the ship began moving faster. The lifeboat was pulled behind her. The rope stretched tighter and tighter until finally it snapped. Just like that, the Mary Celeste began drifting away. Briggs and the others were now trapped in a tiny lifeboat somewhere in the Atlantic. And the strangest part? The Mary Celeste didn't sink. It didn't explode. It simply kept sailing. 9 days later, the Dei Grazia found her, still afloat, still carrying most of her cargo, still looking like a perfectly normal ship. Except for one thing. There was nobody aboard, and the lifeboat, gone. Captain Briggs, his wife Sarah, their daughter Sophia, and 7 other people were never seen again. No bodies were recovered. No wreckage from the lifeboat was ever found. And no one ever discovered exactly what happened after that rope disappeared into the ocean. Maybe Briggs believed the Mary Celeste was in danger. Maybe the alcohol vapor really did frighten everyone into the lifeboat. And maybe the entire tragedy began with a decision that seemed completely reasonable. But there's one problem. If that really happened, why was the Mary Celeste found almost completely intact? And why did nobody ever make it back aboard? That's the part of the story we still can't explain. Okay, the alcohol theory explains a lot, but there's still a problem. A pretty big one. If Briggs was only trying to escape a possible explosion, why didn't they simply stay near the ship? The lifeboat was connected to the Mary Celeste. They had experienced sailors. They had navigation equipment, and they expected to return. But once that rope snapped, everything changed. The Mary Celeste sailed away, and the people in the lifeboat were left at the mercy of the Atlantic. Maybe the weather became too dangerous. Maybe the lifeboat capsized. Maybe they drifted far from the shipping routes. We simply don't know. And this is exactly why the Mary Celeste became such a legend. Over the years, people came up with some wild explanations. Pirates, mutiny, murder, even supernatural forces. But none of them explains all the evidence. The alcohol theory is probably more believable than a ghost ship. But even that is still a theory, because nobody was there to tell us what Briggs actually saw. Nobody heard his final decision. Nobody knows what happened after the lifeboat disappeared. And that's the frustrating part. We have pieces of the puzzle: the empty ship, the missing lifeboat, the alcohol cargo, the water in the hold, the abandoned navigation equipment. But we don't have the final piece, and maybe we never will. Because the Atlantic kept the only witnesses: Benjamin Briggs, Sarah Briggs, little Sophia, and the 7 sailors who disappeared with them. And that leaves us with one terrifying possibility. The Mary Celeste may never have been a ghost ship at all. It may have been something much worse. A perfectly ordinary ship, caught in a chain of perfectly understandable decisions that ended in a completely unimaginable disaster.